Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I am Sean. Today I am reviewing Spartacus by Howard Fast. Put it right up there next to my signed book by Kirk Douglas, Last Tango in Brooklyn. Kirk Douglas, the actor from Spartacus. Okay, so this book, Spartacus by Howard Fast, was on my 25 books to read in 2025 list. I projected it as my fifth most anticipated read of the year, and I projected it as a 5-star book. The main reason I was so hopeful about it is because I think I am fairly generous toward books with movie adaptations, because as a writer, I want to make sure that writers get credit for what they do. That said, I am not really a person who is like, one of the people who say like, oh, the book is always better, A lot of times I think the movies tend to make good changes. The changes films make, for the most part, I see why they make those changes. I think there's a vast difference between what works in a book and what works in a movie. They're just different, so I understand making a lot of changes for films. First, for some backstory. So Howard Fast was a real prolific writer, and something about him is he was blacklisted. In fact, he served, I think, a 3-month prison sentence because basically he refused to name names. Because this was the era of McCarthyism, like the Red Scare. And I think it was a real bad time in American history. There's been a lot of bad times in American history, but this is definitely one of them where being connected with or being alleged to be a communist was really like criminal, and I just think that is completely un-American, because I believe that as Americans you have a right to believe whatever you want. That is your right as an American. What you cannot do is use threats of harm or commit violence. So I think the era of McCarthyism and stuff is just real bad and deeply un-American. So for that reason, even though I am no fan of communism whatsoever, I relate with Howard Fast for that reason. And as far as refusing to testify, refusing to name names of who like else he knew that may have been like communist or whatever in this group he was in, I respect him not testifying about that. No one likes a snitch. So I respect him for both of those points or whatever. I respect, like, as a communist or a far left guy or whatever, he has the right to have those views. That's entirely within his rights as an American. So I support him there. And then I also support him for the whole like not testifying to Congress thing, because why should he? I respect that even though he knew like refusing to testify would get him in trouble, and got him, I think, a 3-month prison sentence, he did that time, so he stood by his beliefs, and I definitely respect that. His problems didn't end with his release from prison. Once he was released from prison, he was blacklisted. He was kind of like a known or suspected communist or whatever. So as a result, like a lot of films and stuff, a lot of movie studios would not touch anything he wrote, because it's kind of weird nowadays to think about it, because Hollywood is like so far left wing. But like at the time, if you were on the blacklist, they wouldn't work with you, And that's something that like Kirk Douglas really helped to break, because Kirk Douglas was open about it. He was real openly like, yeah, we're making this Spartacus film written by Howard Fast. And also the guy who wrote the screenplay for the film Spartacus was a guy named Dalton Trumbo, who was also blacklisted. So just as I want to express my support for Howard Fast, with everything he went through, I also kind of want to, express support for Kirk Douglas for having the bravery or whatever, the courage to openly work with blacklisted figures, Howard Fast and Dalton Trumbo, because it's because of that that they broke the blacklist, and people who were blacklisted, began to get jobs again. So major respect to both of these guys, Howard Fast for, believing what he did and holding to his views, and Kirk Douglas for openly saying, it's by Howard Fast and Dalton Trumbo. So I like both of those guys because of that. Okay, now for the book itself. So, when I began to read the book, the first chapter, I was like, okay, this is very different than the movie. And I don't really want to say like everything that happens, like, oh, this is how the book begins and it's different from the film because the film does this. And, this happens in the book and in the movie, this happens. I don't really want to tell you guys like all those details because I think that's something you should like experience for yourself, because I think that's a lot of the joy and satisfaction or whatever in reading is discovering for yourself all of those scenes. So, whether you've seen the movie before or not, to read the book and experience it for yourself. I really like that. And I really appreciate that in books, especially with film adaptations. Because myself personally, that's why I like reading these books so much with movie adaptations, because I know in my head how the movie goes, so I can picture all of that. So when I read the book, I can picture the book as if it was the movie. So I could picture like, okay, I know how all these characters look. I kind of know like the grainy look of the film because it was made in the 60s, I think. So I could just picture everything about the book as if it's in the film. So it's kind of like an alternate take or a director's cut or whatever, or a writer's cut or whatever. Like, what if they made the film exactly as Howard Fast intended it? That's how I like to read or imagine these things. So for that reason, I don't really want to just tell all the details about like, oh, this is how the book is different than the movie. I think that's something you should experience for yourself. So I don't really want to go in depth about talking about how the book is different than the film, exactly all the differences. I don't want to lay all that out. One thing I will say though that is different about the book is it's a much more non-linear plot, and it's a lot less centered, I guess, around Spartacus. Like, Spartacus is not really the protagonist of the book. He's the main character, of course, but I don't want to say this part yet. But instead of being like largely, Spartacus is the protagonist, it's instead like these five or so other characters. In terms of the writing of the book, I like it pretty well. I think Howard Fast is definitely a skilled, talented writer. I like his writing pretty well. Okay, I think that about does it for the completely like non-spoilery section, because I kind of want to talk about some issues that would be kind of more spoilery. I'm not sure if they would be light, moderate, or heavy spoilers, but if you don't want to know anything about that, go ahead and skip to the next chapter or whatever when I give my rating for the book. Otherwise, I kind of want to talk about some of my issues with the book in more detail. Do, 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 do. Okay, I think the biggest problem with the book kind of is that Howard Fast basically has the book start with Spartacus has already been killed, and basically you have these Romans going down the road, and all of the crucified slaves are up there, just like kind of how the movie ends. We kind of begin at that point where all of the slaves are already been crucified. Spartacus has already been defeated. Initially, this was not a problem. I thought it was interesting starting that way, because it's like clear from the onset, like you're not reading this like hoping, wondering, even if you know history, like hoping that the slaves are going to win, hoping that Spartacus is going to win, because that's how a story would usually proceed. But what Howard Fast does is he begins it with all the slaves already crucified and Spartacus defeated. So instead of it being a story about, the slave Spartacus revolting and, whatever, his whole journey, instead you start at the end, and then you kind of piece together what happened through all these different characters talking and sharing, their knowledge about Spartacus, their opinion about Spartacus. That's basically what the book is about. The book is not really about Spartacus. It's about the 4 or 5 different characters who are talking about Spartacus, how they were affected by Spartacus, what they think about him. I kind of liked that. It was a real different like beginning than I was expecting. So I was enjoying it for the first, I don't know, 150 pages, 200 pages or so. I was enjoying it. But then it was also kind of beginning to drag on for a little bit because so much of the book was just about these rich Romans in a villa or whatever talking about Spartacus. The longer it went on, the less and less I became interested in it, both in these characters and in Spartacus. I just didn't really care so much anymore because it's like, why does it matter so much about Spartacus right now? He is dead. Why does it matter exactly like how this revolt began? The revolt was defeated. And this is also something where the movie makes a change that I think is for the better, especially with the way Howard Fast decided to present the book. Because in the movie, you know, Spartacus is alive to the end and he is crucified. He is there through to the end. Whereas in the book, you know, he's already dead at the start of it. So when I was reading it, I was kind of thinking, you know, no, he's probably not really dead. He's going to be one of the last, you know, slaves who are crucified, and you're actually going to meet him while he is still alive. Well, this is a major spoiler kind of, but that is not the case. It's actually a different slave who is the last one alive. So Spartacus was in fact killed like during the final climactic battle in the film, you know, the big battle at the end with the legions and everything. Basically in the book, that's when Spartacus dies. And this is why I think that was kind of a bad decision by Howard Fast because, you know, with Spartacus being dead, it doesn't really matter so much anything about him anymore. It doesn't matter how he became a slave or how he like decided to revolt or what happened with the revolt or how it was defeated or whatever, because you know, page 1, Spartacus lost and he's dead. So as I'm reading, I just get less and less and less interested in Spartacus because what's it matter all these things about, oh, let's go into the backstory more about Spartacus. He's already dead, so who cares now? And when it got to the scene of this final slave being crucified, even though that was a very like haunting, vivid scene or whatever, and it's bothered me for like a week or two ever since I read it, a real, you know, vivid, grotesque scene about the final slave being crucified. Then what Howard Fast does is he has like not quite 100 pages, but it really felt like that, where you go into this slave's like past and basically you go through his whole life and you see how this guy became a slave and like his association with Spartacus, and it's through this slave that you learn about like the final battle. But by that point, I just didn't really care anymore. I didn't care like how this final battle goes because I know they lose it and I don't care about this other slave. So I think it was a real bad decision by Howard Fast that like the final 100 pages or so of the book are about this other slave. And it's like, why? Why is it about this other slave, like these 100 pages, when the book is supposed to be about Spartacus? And I know you're learning about Spartacus through this slave, but again, it doesn't really matter about Spartacus at this point because he's dead. So essentially, a way I think that this book might have been improved is what if that slave was actually the perspective character or whatever. So, you know, you begin with that slave. So in a way, the book that I kind of come to mind for this is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey? That book, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, is set from the like Indian guy's point of view. Even though like in the film, the Jack Nicholas or Nicholson, I always get the actor and the golfer confused. Nicholas or Nicholson. I think Nicholas is the golfer, so Jack Nicholson. In the film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest or whatever, in the book, the main character or the point of view character is the Indian, and the main character is the Jack Nicholson character, you know? So basically what that allows you to do is when the Jack Nicholson character, you know, you can actually see him die or whatever. But the story continues because it's set from the Indians' perspective. In the same way, I think this book could have worked the same way. So Spartacus dies in the, you know, battle against the Romans or whatever, but the story can go on through the perspective of this other slave. So for that reason, I think the book might have worked a lot better if this, like, point of view character, baby, was this other slave. So instead of having it set thank you, baby. Instead of having the book set after Spartacus has already been defeated, have the book thank you, baby. Have the book be set wholly from the perspective of this other slave. So you could see them, how they become a slave, how they meet Spartacus, how they join the revolt with Spartacus, you know, and then ultimately the final battle with the Romans. And then you can see Spartacus get killed, and this last gladiator, this last slave, is alive to continue the tale. And you see this the final slave, the perspective character, get crucified, and the book ends with him. That would make it a lot more interesting, and that would make it so I would actually care about those final 100 pages where that slave has been crucified, because I would actually care about that character at that point, you know? That would be the central character. But instead, the way Howard Fast does it, I don't really care about this guy because I read this book because I want to read about Spartacus. I don't want to read about this other slave, you know? And at this point, it doesn't matter about this other slave because their revolt was defeated. They lost. So, fundamentally, I think his book would have been a lot better if this other slave would have been the perspective character. Anyway, my final ranking for the book. This is really difficult. I would kind of want to dock it a star maybe for, you know, the final 100 pages or so, losing interest in the book. But I think what I'll do is I'll kind of credit Howard Fast, since I support, you know, his, you know, association, whatever. He could be a communist if he wants. That's his right as an American. And his decision to, like, you know, do a prison sentence, you know, by sticking to his beliefs, you know. I respect that. So I think because of that, even though I'm tempted to dock the book a star for, you know, losing interest in it, I think I won't, just kind of in support of Howard Fast and what he did. So I'm going to give the book 5 stars. It's not like going to be a 5-star masterpiece where I think everyone should read it, but I think all in all, it's worth reading. Thank you, babe. And, you know, I like books with movie adaptations. I want to make sure writers get credit for what they do. So even though, like, nowadays, if you're talking about Spartacus, you're probably going to be talking about, like, the other TV show or whatever. You're not going to be talking about the movie made in the 60s so much. But for me, I'm kind of old-fashioned. You know, I like the Spartacus film. I've never seen the new Spartacus series at all. So I definitely want to make sure Howard Fast gets credit for what he did. I do think Howard Fast is a very skilled writer, and some of his description is very good. Some of his dialogue is also very good. Thank you, baby. Gosh, it's so hard to film a video when you have a conure telling you thank you, baby, the whole time. I don't think it's quite on the level of, like, go out and buy this immediately, but I think it's definitely, like, if you see it in the library or the bookstore or whatever, to go ahead and pick up a copy. Or if, like me, you like reading books with movie adaptations, in that case I would say yes, definitely go out and buy it. It was interesting reading the book because it was so different from the film. So even though I think the film largely made changes for the right reasons, since the book is such a different experience, that makes it enjoyable to read it because it is so very different. But this also kind of segues into my final thought for the book and the film, is both are enjoyable in their own right. So read the book and see the movie. I think they're both enjoyable for different reasons. They both have their different strengths and qualities. So that is it for my review of Spartacus by Howard Fast. I enjoyed it pretty well. It was a very different experience than watching the film. I am not sure how enthusiastic I am about reading another book by Howard Fast. I think one of his other more popular books is called The Immigrants, but I don't know anything about that. I don't know how I would say my enthusiasm is for reading another Howard Fast book. I think I would say I would be intrigued to read another book by him, but not in a rush to do it at all. So I would probably not buy another of his books, but if I was able to get a free copy or whatever, like if we had a copy of the bookstore that was going to be like thrown away or donated or whatever, I would take the book then and eventually read it. Or if I saw another of his books at the library, I would pick it up and give it a try. Anyway, that is it. Thank you guys for watching. See you next time. Bye. Nibbler wants out. Okay, I'll let you out. I actually had to put like a lock on the cage because Nibbler actually found a way to open his cage, and he could do it from the inside and the outside. So I've just been sitting working on my computer, and I've looked over and I've seen Nibbler at the top of his cage, and I'm like, Nibbler, how did you get out? So I had to like find a lock to put on his cage so he can't open his door. Okay, I gotta let him out. Thank you guys for watching. See you next time. Bye.
2, 3, 4.